Some people think the Tennessee Titans will finish last in the AFC South, but I'm here to tell you it'll be the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'll explain why on today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. It is the last episode of our AFC South deep dives. We've talked about the Houston Texans. We talked about the Indianapolis Colts. Now it's time for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I am here to tell you that they have had the worst offseason in the AFC South. I'm going to explain why. Then we're going to hear from Tony Wiggins from Locked On Jags and his thoughts on this team. And then finally, I'll tell you where I have Jacksonville finishing, and spoiler alert, last in the division. So we'll talk about that. Before we do want to thank you guys for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. And speaking of every day, shout out to my everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday. If you aren't an everydayer, you need to be one. It's been a great week to be an everydayer. We went through all the position groups in the AFC South, and I ranked all the teams. Offense on Monday. Tuesday was defense. Then we did Houston, and we did the Colts. Now it's time for Jacksonville. Next week is going to be top 5 week. I'm going to be doing top 5 lists all week long. Send your top 5 topics to me at TikTok Titans on Twitter, or you can put them down below in the comments here on YouTube. But with that being said, I think Jacksonville has had the worst offseason of any team in the AFC South. I talked about Houston. I gave Houston a B, B-. I think the Titans are a B+, A- offseason. I gave the Colts a C. Maybe you give it a C+ at best. But you look at Jacksonville. I gave Jacksonville a D+ on their all-season grade. Maybe a C- if you want to be generous. And here's the thing. So obviously, I cover the Titans, but I make no, I don't try to hide it. I am a Tennessee Titans fan. Look around, okay? I am a Titans fan to my core, and I have been for 25 years now, okay? So I'm not going to try to act like I'm just, some unbiased, outside observer. I try to be honest. I give good players credit where it's due and teams credit when they deserve it and all of that, but I just hate what Jacksonville has done here. I just absolutely hate it. I mean, look, they bring in Eric Armstead on the defensive line. I like that move. I wanted the Titans to grab Armstead if possible. That's a good move. I'm not going to say I wanted Armstead for the Titans and then not like it for the Jags. But on the flip side of that, my previews for free agency, I did not want Gabe Davis. He was the number 1 player in free agency. I did not want the Titans to go out and get. I don't want to pay Gabe Davis $13 million a year. What are we doing? No, I did not want to do that. And Jacksonville did that. So I'm keeping it consistent, okay? The Eric Armstead move is all right, but the Gabe Davis move is terrible for Jacksonville. Look, they bring in Mitch Morse at center, and Tony Wiggins from Locked On Jags is going to join us in just a minute, and he talks about how, good move, but he's not certain that that's an excellent move to shore up the interior offensive line. They go out and they bring in Ezra Cleveland. Ezra Cleveland is a below average starter, okay? Brandon Scherf is the other guard. They didn't add him, but he's an older player, And then they bring in Darnell Savage, who flamed out in Green Bay. Ronald Darby is going to be their CB2, and I like Ronald Darby as a solid player, but he's an older player as well. Is he going to be a lockdown corner for them? Their cornerbacks are not good. They extended Trevor Lawrence. I talked about that recently. They had to do it. They had to pay him. You cannot let a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who got you to a playoff win, who is the number 1 pick, who has shown flashes, you cannot just let him walk in free agency. You can't do that as an organization. I get it. But $275? Now, his cap hits don't get real bad for a couple of years, so I get it. But, man, that's a massive commitment to a player who has been very up and down and, quite honestly, disappointing from what people thought he would be as a number one overall pick. He has not lived up to his selection in the draft. That's a reality here. So, outside of that, their draft, look, I like some players in their draft. Brian Thomas Jr. is okay. Like, I honestly like A.D. Mitchell better than Brian Thomas Jr. personally. That's just my thoughts. I did like Mason Smith out of LSU. I did. Jerrion Jones, solid player as well out of Florida State, slot cornerback. Javon Foster, you guys know, if you listen to the draft on, I love me some Javon Foster, offensive tackle out of Missouri. So I'm not going to hate on Jacksonville's draft all that much, but you lose Calvin Ridley to the Titans, and that was embarrassing. That entire situation, Trent Baalke tried to screw the Falcons and not have a second-round pick to be paid, so he tried to wait until after free agency had officially begun to bring back Calvin Ridley, which allowed Calvin Ridley to have more talks with the Titans and ultimately come over to the Titans. So they totally dropped the bag on that one, fumbled the bag, as the kids would say, with Calvin Ridley. Lose Rayshon Jenkins, lose Darius Williams in the secondary, lose Foley Fatukasi up front on the defensive line. Like, I just do not like Jacksonville's offseason. Gabe Davis especially. Okay, if you bring in Gabe Davis and he's your number two, with Calvin Ridley still as your number one, and then you have Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, okay, now that makes sense. You know, he's a good wide receiver too, to be a deep threat. You can play him as your X, the big physical guy on the line of scrimmage, put Calvin Ridley back in the position he's supposed to be as a Z, movement wide receiver. But when you go out and you pay Gabe Davis, and then you lose Calvin Ridley, now you got egg on your face. Now that's terrible. So to me, this is a C-, D+ level all season for Jacksonville. I do not think that they got significantly better. And as a matter of fact, we're like, the Texans got better. The Colts stayed the same. But to me, Jacksonville got worse. Their team is worse this year than they were last year. So I already gave you guys the hint of where I think they finish in the division, but I'll give you my record prediction for Jacksonville as well. Before we do that, though, got a conversation behind enemy lines with Tony Wiggins from Locked On Jags. Excited to talk about that and get into that convo. Before I do, though, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, Game Time is the best place to buy tickets, especially if you're going to an MLB game this summer. Look, I buy all my tickets on Game Time. NBA, NFL, MLB. I bought concert tickets on Game Time. I just bought WNBA tickets on Game Time. And my mom sent me some prices for a Fever game to see Caitlin Clark. And I was like, you know what, Mom? Hold on. Let me go check Game Time. And I got better seats for cheaper than what my mom was looking at one of the big ticket sites on Game Time. They have the best features, killer last-minute deals, all-in prices. You get a panoramic view from your seat. They have the Game Time guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time's going to credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets, especially MLB tickets, with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, folks, very excited for this conversation. Always excited for all my conversations with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Tony Wiggins from Locked On Jags. We're going to be getting some behind enemy lines information for someone with boots on the ground who's been covering the team for a long time in multiple different avenues, multiple different places. The man's done it all, seen it all, heard it all. So excited to dive into that. Before we do, thanks again for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday. Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. Also, I know a lot of Titans fans, a lot of Jags fans will stop by my show. Not a lot of Titans fans like to go over to Locked On Jags and see what they got to say. So make sure you check out Locked On Jags as well if you want to get, Tony's insights on a daily basis, especially after things happen. Titans and Jags play each other. I know people like that. But with that being said, before I start asking my fiery questions, putting you in the hot seat, Tony, how you doing today?
Man, I'm doing good, man. When you said, man, myth of the legend, I had to make sure I was on the screen and it wasn't two pictures of you sitting up there, man, the way you've been killing it. I see you. You know, we go back and forth a little bit, but it's all in good nature fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, both fan bases like that. There's got to be a little bit of competitiveness here and there with division rivals. It makes it what it should be. But with that being said, obviously, all love always. And I'll let you kind of just paint the picture for us here. I know the Jaguars had some transition this season. They've done a lot of things. What has been the biggest move this offseason that Jacksonville has made in your mind?
I think it was the biggest move was actually reversing the way that they were thinking. So it's not like one personnel person, or the fans will tell you it's signing Mitch Morse because they think we had the worst center in the league, right? So now we have a proven center for a team that was a playoff contender. I think, though, it was a change in attitude from believing that you had arrived as a drafting and developing team. It's easy to do that when you win with a bunch of young players, especially the manner in which they won in 2022, where they were 2-7 and ended up winning the division by winning a whole bunch of games. And then they won a playoff game where they were down 27-0, and they came back on. So you would think, man, those are the cliff notes to guys growing up, right? The thing about the NFL is there are no cliff notes. That was just a moment in time, and it was just perfect timing. There's a whole bunch of stuff you still have to do. And the Jaguars pretty much thought, well, you know what? We like our team. We're going to be a draft and develop team because we're going to play with those guys. We like the guys we have. And it was the biggest mistake ever. Competition is what this league is all about. Pressure busts pipes, iron sharpens iron. All of those cliches are true. And we can look no further than the Houston Texans, who did exactly this year what the Jaguars did last year, but then they go and get Diggs and they go get Daniil Hunter. They say, it's all gas, no brakes. We're not, and that's why they're a threat to everybody. Now, I don't know if it's going to work, but the Jaguars then said, you know what? No, we need to get back on the horse and start adding people and realizing that we need to change some of our roster and create more competition. And that's what they did. I hope it's not too late.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. And it's funny, that makes me think of, I talked about the Colts on my show yesterday, and the Colts kind of just brought back all their own guys, didn't really bring in a lot of outside talent. So that was one of the questions I had with them. But speaking of questions, you're looking at the Jags roster right now, and I know that there's still summer free agency. There are some veterans out there. There will be cuts, in that last week of roster cuts after training camp in the preseason. You can bring in some guys from there. But if you're looking at the Jags right now, what is, in your mind, the biggest hole left on the roster, or the biggest weakness that they have that they can maybe still improve or maybe not?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked. For me, the biggest hole is the interior offensive line. Still, I think they need, I always thought they needed more, but I understand that they have committed themselves to certain people, whether it be financially or draft wise. I get it. For the fans, it's the defensive backs. So I said the biggest thing that I have a concern about are the DBs. And I'm going to clarify that, because those two things sound like identical twins, but they aren't. I think the hole is on the offensive line. I think the numbers, the people they have in the defensive backfield, I think it's enough. But the concern is you get one injury, you're done. I think the way that they're going to play, man to man, in your face, everything in front of you, downhill, I think if somebody gets hurt or somebody has a bad season, one person, I think it changes the entire thing. I don't think they have a whole bunch of, and this is a newsflash, there ain't 4 or 5 lockdown corners on this team. And newsflash, there ain't 4 or 5 lockdown corners on anybody's team. But with the way that they're going to play, they have also committed to Ronald Darby. They've committed to, at least for the next couple of years. They got Jarian Jones. They brought in Darnell Savage. They have Tyson Campbell. They have Andre Sisco. All names you know. And then Antonio Johnson's an underrated player. I just named 6 people. They're only going to really play 8 guys back there, right? So I would think that from the numbers and the names and the commitment they've made that they're fine. But my biggest concern is they're likely to be the one group that doesn't play as well as we hope they will, and that's still a concern. Doesn't mean they need to go out and get somebody, because that costs money. But if there's anything, it's that defensive backfield could be the only thing I believe that could hold them back. They're all in on the interior offensive line. That was the choice they made with Brandon Sheriff restructuring, re-signing Ezra Cleveland. So to them, they're fine because they have Cooper Hodges, who missed all of last season. They're good in their opinion. I just wonder if they are as good as they believe they are, or if they aren't as good as I think they might not be.
Right. You know, what's funny is you mentioned the defensive backfield, because when I was doing my prep for this week and ranking all the AFC South position groups, I'll tell you, the Titans have good cornerbacks now because they went out and paid a bunch of money to have good cornerbacks. But overall, the AFC South has rough defensive backfields. Like the safety groups, the Titans safety group is not very good outside of Amani Hooker. Cisco is good, but there are questions. You know what I mean? You go into you go to Houston, Cody Davis from Locked On Texans was talking about Jalen Petre's got to play better. You know, like you look across the board, Julian Blackmon's had injuries. Nick Cross has underperformed. Like there aren't a lot of good safeties and just general defensive backfields. It's hard to have good defensive backs in today's NFL. So I think that's a common theme throughout the entire division, is that the defensive backfields are not that great. But looking at the division as a whole, as we're kind of doing now, I don't want to get any kind of lockdown season prediction, but what's your kind of feel right now on where Jacksonville might rank within the AFC South? Where do you think kind of their ceiling or their floor could be in the division?
I think they're still battling for the number one spot. And I feel that way because look, man, they were 9-8 for 2 straight years. They did it differently, and it came down to week 18 against the Titans, both games, And so, you can't think the sky is falling just because those things look, like I say, 9-8 looks identical, but then when you think about it, it's not. So the thing is, for me, is they have gotten better. They've gotten bigger. I believe their defensive line group, like 7 deep, is like scary. And combine that with Ryan Nielsen and how he wants to play, I think that could be the thing. The Jaguars could actually be better. I think their wide receivers are bigger and more physical and can play through contact better than they have in the past. The thing for me is going to come down to this. Being better, does it translate to being put in a better situation? Because being better now, as opposed to being better a year or two ago when Houston was down and before the Titans had committed to a long-term quarterback and also made another coaching change that has excited their franchise. And then with the coach being Steady Eddie, and we talk about them as if they're like an afterthought, but they were a drop pass away from possibly being the team that got to the playoffs and won the division if the Jaguars had stumbled up like they did against Tennessee. So all of those teams are sitting right there, and they're rightfully confident about themselves. The offense in the division has improved, though, and I think that's because the Titans, I think they have improved offensively. Yeah,
I think no matter what happens, this division is going to be fun to watch. And it's not just going to be because all the teams are bad and they're, scrapping at I think we're going to see some good football from the division this year. I think it's going to be very fun to watch. But with that said, thank you so much, Tony, for coming on. Give us, that behind the scenes information that I, as a Titans guy, could never bring. Great insight, and obviously look forward to talking to you during the season. Maybe another preseason division crossover like we always do with everybody involved will be fun too. But thank you so much for coming on. Definitely appreciate it, man.
I appreciate you, Tyler. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Titans fans, let's cap off today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast, the final installment in our AFC South deep dives, talking Jacksonville Jaguars today. Of course, if you missed Houston Texans, if you missed Indianapolis Colts, if you missed my rankings of the offensive and defensive position groups within the division from earlier this week, go back and check those out. Do want to thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure that you get subscribed. Stay subscribed. Also want to let you guys know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's here on YouTube, and it's also available on Amazon Fire TV. It's called Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts from Locked On. Plus, you get coverage of every league from our national shows. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So I told you guys earlier, I hated the Jacksonville Jaguars offseason. Was not a fan. Do not like what they did. The moves they made, I think they actively got worse. And last year, Jacksonville finished 8-9, I do believe, losing to the Titans in Week 18, where Trevor Lawrence pissed down his leg. Yeah, I remember that. Nobody seems to remember that. I do. All right. Trevor Lawrence was terrible in that game and literally killed their team. Trevor Lawrence killed the team in that game. But they didn't get any better. I thought they got worse. Losing Calvin Ridley is huge. Big steal by the Titans there. Interior offensive line, still not good. Defensive backfield, still not good. Linebackers, still not that great. They got a decent rotation on the interior defensive line. They have some good edge rushers, no doubt about it. But, I mean, I'm just not impressed with anything they got. Their wide receivers, their offensive line, their defensive backfield, their linebackers. Honestly, other than that defensive line, I'm just not impressed at all. I think they're really low in the division in a lot of those rankings, and that's where I had them. So for me, you look at Jacksonville, I got them going 7-10. 7-10, maybe 6-11, finish last in the division. I just find it hilarious. This is really what it comes down to. After 2022, the Titans had an epic collapse, bad play, injuries, a little bit of that opening 7 weeks was a bit of a lie, in my opinion. I even said that during that season. I was literally saying, like, Titans haven't played tough competition. The team might not be as good as their record says. Everybody calm down. But then they had the complete fall off. And Jacksonville took advantage. They were 2-7, and to their credit, they played very well down the stretch. They barely beat a Tennessee Titans team led by Josh Dobbs, where once again, Trevor Lawrence was not good in that game. Now, then they follow that up with the playoff win, coming back down from 27 against Chargers. And I get it. You know, that has to fire you up. That has to be like, oh, these are the guys. Like, this is the moment. Like, Trevor Lawrence. I get that. I do. But then last year, they did not look like a team that was ready to take the next step. And as Tony talked about, they didn't make the additions that they needed. But I don't think they've done that this year either. I think they've actively got worse. So you look at the all season, you say, oh, the big mistake that we made last year was we rested on our laurels too much and we didn't add enough. Eric Armstead at 31, Gabe Davis overpay, Mitch Morse. Is that enough? I don't think so. I simply don't think so. So to me, this is a simple one. I don't think Jacksonville is very good. I don't think Lawrence is good enough to drag a mid-roster to more. And it's just hilarious that all these Jacksonville fans were telling us that the Jags are running the division for the next 10 years. And it's a decade of dominance coming in Duval. And, you know, this was just step one, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then they take a major step back, don't even make the playoffs. People are wondering whether Trevor Lawrence is worth paying. They have a terrible offseason. They lose their number one wide receiver. They don't get much better in some of their weaknesses. Like, this is a nightmare for Jacksonville fans. Whether they want to admit it or not, it's a nightmare. And now CJ Stroud is better than Trevor Lawrence. I think it's pretty clear. The Texans have a better coach. They have a better roster. And let me talk about Doug Peterson for a second, because dude won a Super Bowl in Philly. And when you have that Super Bowl to your name, like, I could see someone arguing that Doug Peterson is a better coach than DeMeco Ryans because Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl, right? Right? That seems fair. But ask Philly fans about Doug Peterson. And look at Jacksonville. and how they misused Calvin Ridley last year as the X receiver. Like, I don't think that Doug Peterson is some incredible coach. I think he's just an average coach. That year in Philly was special, no doubt about it. He gets his credit. But his coordinators and his assistants were excellent as well. And as soon as they were gone, well, things got a little rocky. So, again, it's hard to say that Doug Peterson and criticize his coaching at all because he has won a Super Bowl. But I don't think that he's a great coach. And I don't think that Trevor Lawrence is a great quarterback. And I think their offseason was bad. So 7-10, 6-11, 4th in the AFC South. That's where I see Jacksonville. Let me know where you guys see Jacksonville. Remember, next week, top 5 week, peak summer. We're going to do some top 5 lists. If you want your top 5 topic read on air, let me know down below. Put them in the comments. But that is going to do it for me today, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.